what we're going to cover a little bit today is the architecture of WordPress. How does that fit in with the security aspect of it? And we're going to take it like what they call a layer cake approach, or a castle approach, or defense in depth approach. So we're going to talk about the server, the application layer, and a bit about our users and administrators as well. All right, so a little bit of myself. Like I mentioned, I'm an instructor at Fairfax County Public School Systems. I also teach occasionally security seminars for George Mason University and Learning Tree International. I'm a certified information system security professional, as well as a certified auditor. I currently work, I can't give you the specifics, but I work for the Department of Defense here in Arlington, Virginia, securing systems for the federal government. And I have about 30 plus years of IT experience. We used to be called data processing back then. And the last half of the career, the last 15 plus years, I spent in IT security. About half of those were at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., and the other half with many federal agencies in the Washington, D.C. area. And my last 7 years, I spent quite a bit teaching. You know, I've been a fan of open source and Linux, and WordPress being a great open source package. It's a great tool if you want to build sites quickly and securely as well. So, and by the way, that's my contact information. I'm master of my own domain. My first name is Adrian, and last name is Mikeliunas, M-I-K-E-L-I-U-N-A-S. And the domain that I use for my WordPress classes. And you can access the material, by the way. So I like to share, as many professors will do. All right. Now, let's take a quick look at the architecture. Okay, this is the big picture. I built that picture because I couldn't find one, and this is what I show my students. Okay, so if you're coming from the internet and you are a student, a user, administrator, you're coming from the left-hand side of that dashed red line, meaning you're coming from the internet, right? So you access the website of your WordPress hosting provider. If you happen to be on an intranet, you're accessing not from the internet, but you're accessing from the intranet if you're at the university campus or other location. Regardless of where you access, you're still going to go through the next three layers. The first layer is, and again, this is your traditional WordPress. I know some people got it running on a Microsoft web server and IIS, Internet Information Server, but the traditional has been Apache or NGIX. You know, there are many forms. Most preferred operating system there is Linux or a Unix derivative. But again, the mileage changes depending on what the scalability or availability that you want to put on, right? But that's the first layer. The Apache web server is the one that basically sends you the HTML, pictures, JavaScript, CSS, and additional multimedia, all right? Then we move into the second layer, which is what we call the application server. And really, WordPress is an application. It's a series, mostly PHP scripts. That's really what runs on the server. And the PHP scripts, what they do just about everything. They handle user editing, okay, user addition, user deletion, page or post updates, okay. Every time if you look at the URL of your site, you're going to see that most of the time when you're in the system administrator's hat, all the URLs usually end with a PHP. When you're in the user side, when you switch or put on the hats of the user, you're going to see PHP most of the time, like 99% of the time, goes away, except for the login, perhaps. But users, they normally go to static page. Well, I call them static pages, but basically it's a page that gets built with your content or somebody else's provided content. And that's all they can do. That's all they can access, correct? Now, as you know, I'm assuming most of you know that everything in all the content except for images and videos, all the text content, let me qualify, all the text content, user themes, preferences, plugins, preferences, and so forth, get stored in a database. The database the preferred database is MySQL, which is a free open source database that got purchased by Sun Microsystems, and then Sun Microsystems got purchased by Oracle. So technically, the free database is owned by one of the largest database players in the world, which is Oracle. Kind of oxymoronic, but that's where we are. Now, the reason we mention the database is because that really has your user accounts, passwords, preferences. It's really your key intellectual property. A lot of people say, well, it's just a database. It's like, they don't even think about it. But that's like your central repository of where all the information about your WordPress site. It even has the tagline, underneath. If you have that all available in your theme, if you have if you install a default WordPress site, it says just another WordPress site or blogging site or whatever you want to call it. That is also stored in the database, and that's one of the beauties and strengths and weakness at the same time that WordPress has. Are we doing okay? All right, just making sure there's no questions, so I'll move on now. Now that you've seen this high-level picture and the 3 layers, and again, some people say, well, the user should be the 4th layer. Yes and no, because we don't manage the users. I mean, they can have viruses in their computers, and that's not our problem. Now, they will try to inject and do bad stuff to us, not consciously, the majority of our regular users, but you have what we call abusers, hackers, malicious people that will try to break into our site. So yes, they are on the left side of that dotted red line. So now that we've seen this high-level picture, let's see what we can do as far as moving into what we call defense in depth. Okay, so we're going to take a look at each of those 3 layers. And the reason we use that, this is something that came from early Egyptian, Roman, medieval times, when people used to build those city forts. Okay, they created those walls that basically were trying to keep the intruders out, right? So if you think about it, remember I said the database is your inner layer, is the one we need the most protection, because it has our most important assets. I mean, the user accounts and the administrator accounts. Of course, the content. Okay, I mean, I'm a nerd, so content is content, right? But the administration part of it is critically important, right? Then we also, of course, we have the application layer, which consists of the WordPress core plus all the extra code that you added via plugins and via your themes, and any other custom code you may have created yourselves, right? And last but not least is the web server layer, which is really what the user connects to. That's really usually whenever there is a compromise or when there is a hacking incident, usually that's where they get first, right? They get into the Apache web server and boom, that's the one that gets compromised first or gets shut down or whichever. So the goal in security is to create, you know that the hacker is going to get through. I mean, that we know for a fact. You can have the best defenses, you can have the best, but you know what? People are people. We got sometimes some users or even administrators that they get lazy and they write down the password in one of those little sticky notes out there, or the password is very weak and somebody kind of second guessed it, and they put it out on the internet, or somehow they found it, or they were able to crack it, right? So they are able to get in. So now they may have logged in as users. Maybe it's not that harmful, but they can do some. They can see other users on the systems. Now they can see who the administrator is, and again, they're going to gain more information as time goes by. So the idea is to create overlapping layers, okay, of security. So if one layer fails, the other one will remain. And this is what, again, in security, we call that the castle approach. Defense is in-depth, is the technical term. Kind of like in a castle, you have the moat right in front of the wall, so they have to, again, you're creating, it's not going to stop a very persistent intruder. but it's going to delay them like heck, right? I mean, it's going to take them some time. They're going to have to bring some archers and ballistas and all kind of contraptions. I mean, great example to watch the Lord of the Rings, okay, trilogy. I mean, it's a lot of castle storming in those movies, so you'll see that again. Just breaching the outer wall, that doesn't mean that they get inside and storm the castle. They still have to go through other inner courts and eventually to get to the vault where the treasure is, right? Same thing with your WordPress website. All right. So moving on in another layer. Now, what I want to start from the inside out, right? So we're going to talk about securing the database server. Number one, well, how do we secure? I mean, in most installations, your database is in a separate subnet. It's not outside accessible, which is good. I mean, we don't want your database. Some people commit the mistake of saying, but I want to update my database from the outside and gonna basically ask a request for them to open a firewall port so I can access my database. That's a big mistake. In 99% of the majority of cases, there are ways you can still access your database, but you should not, in most hosting providers, in most schools, your database should not be accessible from the outside world. It's accessible from the server where the Apache is running. And that's it. There's a connection from your Apache server to your database, right? Which is normally in the wp-config PHP file. It tells it which port, which IP, user ID, and password, right? So that's one of the innermost secrets, okay? All right, so, but the protection of the database is basically keeping a backup copy. What if your database is compromised? What if your server gets totally destroyed? You'd be out of business altogether, right? Your school might have to shut down, okay? So obviously we don't want that. So having a copy is essential. That's the number one. And again, having answered a lot of calls or emails from a lot of people, the first thing I ask is, do you have a copy of the database? Because people say, oh, I've been hacked yesterday, or my server crashed, or something. Again, having a backup is the first security. It's kind of like your spare tire in the car, or having an insurance policy. That's really what a backup is. So you back up basically all your user accounts, the content. Now, if you do a full backup, it's not just the database, but also your themes, plugins, everything that makes up not the core of WordPress. Usually we don't back that up because it's very easy to reinstall that. Most backup software understand that. But let's say you spend hours, thousands of dollars in customizing the look and feel of your theme, and your users created a lot of content. They work on this for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then all of a sudden something happened. There's a hiccup, your system gets hacked, or human error. And unfortunately, again, you're gonna go and tell your boss and say, oh, by the way, we lost all that data. We're gonna have to build it from scratch. He's gonna say, you gotta be kidding. Don't we have a backup? So the first thing in security is have a backup plan, right? Now notice also at the bottom of this slide, I mentioned you should also enable the secure sockets layer, SSL for short, all right? And do some software, and basically tell your WordPress server that you want to enable SSL, and that's going to be the new URL. So basically you want WordPress to enforce SSL. And by the way, I recommend, there's a very simple, there are a few, I wouldn't say dozens, but there's more than a handful of plugins, but the really simple SSL does its job. It just handles the redirection. Now, normally in the commercial world, this is it's less than $100, depending where you buy your SSL, could be from $30 to $70. If you're doing e-commerce, it might be a little higher. Okay, I used to work for VeriSign Consulting, so I know they can go to several $1,000s for an SSL certificate, especially the extended validation time that is used in many e-commerce sites like Amazon, for example, or VeriSign itself. But going back to backups, so we're going to talk a little bit about SSL a bit later. That's more in the outer layers, but I just wanted to mention that a bit ahead. So continuing with the backup, all right, the questions that, because I don't know your environment, how often do you change your pages? Is it daily, weekly, monthly? So that will determine how often you should back up your site, right? So always make sure you have at least a current backup that is, less again, depending how often you change, less than a week old, less than an hour old. Now, the other question is, how many backups should I keep? Now, depending of your hosting plan, some hosting providers nowadays, they offer unlimited space, which is good. That way you can keep 100 backups. And not really, okay? Even though it sounds great, 100 backups, do you really need 100 backups? Because now, no, you need to manage them. They're taking up storage. And yes, I know your hosting provider told you to just have, unlimited storage. The only problem, the more files you have in your WordPress server, it becomes a little slower. It becomes a little sluggish. It depends, again, on the platform. I mean, I'll put that with a little caveat, right? And the third question that I have there is, where should I keep the backups? I remember many, many years ago, I was teaching at GW, George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and it was a Windows Server class. And we came to class one day, and the server was gone, and so was the backup tape and device that was right next to it. So we lost the server and the backup. Lesson learned, never ever keep the backups next to the server, all right? So always keep your backups to a reasonable distance. I mean, in this case, nowadays we do everything online. So your backup should be, yes, you can have your primary backup at your hosting. If you happen to be your host, and I say hosting, but I know some schools, universities, they do the IT on site. So you have an on-site backup copy, but you should also try to have a backup copy in a remote location. You can also back up to the Amazon cloud, to your Google Drive, to Dropbox. There are many free and paid plugins to do that. Also look into plugins. There's quite a few that also will automate the backup, so you don't have to be present to win, right? So you can say, hey, I want to run a backup every day at midnight. And by the way, I say midnight, it depends on your time zone. Many schools are worldwide, so you have to try to do the backups in a kind of like in the middle of the night when there is not that many people logged in. It doesn't really impact the server, but it might be a little sluggish, right? Depending again on your server capacity. So again, keep that in mind. If you want to do locally, okay, send it off-site, or offline, and check if sometimes your IT folks or your hosting provider can do that. I put a couple of links here in this slide. Number one is from the WordPress MDDev website. Great company, by the way. They have a good article on backup plugins where they do a quick comparison. And I list also some of my favorites. I use Updraft Plus in almost all my sites, right? They also, and it is technically free. You can get add-ons, like if you want to back up to Amazon or Google Drive, that's about a $30 license per year, and it's worth it. Also, if you want to move your site from one domain to another, they also offer a $30 plugin for that. Backup WP is also very powerful. Back WP up, sorry. It's also very powerful and allows the automatic scheduling. And last but not least, I put a little $sign. It's called Backup Buddy. It's a commercial option that iThemes sell, and it's also very, very powerful, fully automated. It has, again, that's what you pay for extra dollars. You get better support, a kind of better looking interface, even though Updraft Plus has been sprucing their look and feel in the last year. All right, so now that we cover backups, all right, so, we got one more a slide on backups, and that's related, related to VaultPress. VaultPress is an extra service if you use the Jetpack option. And by the way, can I see a show of hands? I mean, if you can do in the chat, how many are using Jetpack? Right, and I see some warnings about updraft class. Thank you. All right. Right, yes, correct. Yeah, using cron always has. All right, yeah, okay. A few people say no, stay away. I know. I give people options, okay, so it's up to you. But Jetpack is kind of a convenient. It's one plugin that basically has like 30 plus plugins in it. And yeah, I know in the early days, you used to slow down your site like crazy, but they improved. You know, this is Automatic, the company that makes WordPress. They have really improved. And one of the offerings, again, this is for people that they want something simple. They offer a $2 to $30, a month fee, depending of the size, and they do a lot of backups. So since that was the reaction from the audience, I'll move on from this slide. All right, moving on to updating your site. Right now, just like you do patching of Windows desktops, and I'm projecting this from a MacBook Pro side. Even Apple has updates, and even iPhones. My daughter and my wife, they just updated their iPhones one more time. Software updates are kind of a necessary evil, right? In the sense that, yeah, it's a pain in the neck. You got to reboot your system. In the case of a phone or desktop or laptop, but on the server, again, the Apache or the Linux or Windows operating system, they barely reboot, or if they do, you don't notice that. Now, in the case of WordPress, you can put it on maintenance mode, or when you're doing a core update, it will basically tell the world that, hey, it's busy. Again, try to do this in the evening hours. And updating the core of WordPress, okay, the main components is kind of mandatory. I mean, it happens at least every quarter in the last 2 or 3 years. So we've been moving up in version numbers. And that's what keeps our WordPress sites secure, right? And occasionally makes it a little faster too. So there are some advantages, right? So now normally you have to put this on like a checklist, right? So make sure your WordPress sites, and by the way, there are lots of people out there, and now of course many hosting providers. That's how they got into the managed WordPress business. I mean, 2 years ago there was no managed WordPress service, by the way. Not that I recall, and I've been checking providers, for the last 10 years. So now everybody say, hey, we're going to manage your WordPress, because they realized that people had very old sites that was being compromised left and right, because not patching or not even upgrading your PHP version is kind of a pain in the neck. It has a lot of vulnerabilities. So again, updating WordPress core. Now, upgrading your themes. Now, not all the theme providers update nilly-willy every single month. Some of them, depending on how complex the system is, may do that. Your plugins, they get constantly updated. I mean, if you have a website that has about 20 themes or so, you will see that at least 2 or 3 get updated every month. And sometimes there's one plugin that is the one that is updating constantly. Okay, so that means that they're either adding more improvements, or they had a buggy plugin to begin with. By the way, if you use, I use Google Chrome, and I think you can do this with Firefox as well. There is a plugin for your browser called Wapalizer that it will, when anytime you're in a website, it will show you a little WordPress icon, and when you click on it, it gives you the details, some of the versions, the behind the scenes. There's also another website called WP Theme Detector that will tell you what theme. Of course, you can see the code, and kind of, you can guess the, but it not only tells you what the name of the theme, but also where you can buy it or download it if it's a free theme, right? So a lot of goodies in there. So again, updating core is essential to keep your site secure. Even if you don't do anything, even if you stop the presentation right now, if you do your backups and you do your updates, those are the 2 most important things you need to do in order to keep your site secure. Is that clear for everybody? Can I get a thumbs up? All right. All right. And thank you, Scott, for the comment about Updraft Plus. All right. All right, good. Okay, so moving on. Now, just because we have updates, that doesn't mean that they are run. I mean, WordPress has been fixing this issue that annoyed a lot of people. Before, it just gave you a warning and it didn't automatically update. Nowadays, because it's more a security concern. The only issue is sometimes I have some plugins that occasionally they break. So this slide is just for people on my situation. So there is a great plugin called Easy Updates Manager that allows you what to update when and where. So, well, almost, it sounds too good to be true, right? But you can say, never ever update this theme or this plugin. I will do this manually. You want to do this in a test lab first or in your local laptop before you actually do it on your production server. Occasionally there are compatibility issues. I use, just to give you an example, I use WPML, the WordPress multi-language plugin, the commercial version, all paid for. And, you know, last year, twice, in one of my sites, a production site, I did the update and boom, I get this server error 503. Don't you love those? I mean, this is a paid plugin, for goodness sake, okay? So I'm paying to get, you know, a plugin that has issues, at least with my provider. So it was GoDaddy, and I had to update the PHP and a couple other things, all right? But I put it on the Trouble plugin to do the manual automatic, manual update. So occasionally also when you have paid plugins or your own created plugins, you know that WordPress plugin manager only lets you upload plugins. But if that plugin is already loaded and activated, if you try to load it, to upload and install it again, it's going to say, no, plugin is already installed. But this is an upgrade. Well, WordPress doesn't know that it's an upgrade, right? So there's a plugin called Easy Themes and Plugin Upgrades that will let you do the upgrade of your plugin. Basically what it does a bit of renaming of the plugin, zips it, and also keeps, you know, normally when you disable or remove a plugin, it loses all the configuration. So this plugin is very aware of that. So it keeps you honest and out of trouble. So that's why I use it. Very, very convenient. All right, so now that we talk a bit about upgrades, let's talk about, and I did mention plugins, and I'm pretty sure all of you are familiar with plugins, right? So I'll be super brief, but I just want to kind of scare you or bring, just to remind you that when you're running a plugin, they are running with administrator privilege, meaning that they can do just about anything. Of course, you know, you have the source code, usually all the PHP files, so you can see that. But one of my students the other day, he said, hey, Professor Adrian, I found this plugin and I installed it. And guess what? It changed my website into a Bitcoin mining operation. So, of course, he installed one of those unofficial plugins from a website that you shouldn't download stuff from. And it had some, technically it was kind of malware. It was software that it was not intended to do, but it had a couple of JavaScript. I showed him the PHP code where the JavaScript was loaded. So we were able to snip and say, no, just buy the commercial plugin. Don't do illegal stuff because you get into trouble and you can basically, again, the message there is that you can install a plugin and you're giving that plugin manufacturer or software developer privileges, a backdoor to your site. So if they're wanting to steal all your users or whatever, again, normally it doesn't happen. But in the WordPress community, we have a lot of good quality software. But on the other hand, we got a lot of terrible software, okay? Now, and so that's my little caveat right there in the middle of the slide. It says, not all plugins are safe, secure, or supported. And WordPress, because of people like myself and many users like you as well, a lot of people have been complaining, you know, why do you even have this if it's not safe or if it's blah, 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 whatever the excuse. So WordPress, you know, Automatic has been cleaning up. They even have a list, which I provide the URL there, is the plugins tags deprecated. So there are older plugins that occasionally you may want to reuse some of the code or not, but they've been cleaning up the directory. Anything, and many tools that we're going to cover later, they may give you a warning. This plugin has not been supported for the last 4 years. Are you sure you want to use it? So, and in the past, I know when I built some sites, 5 years ago, you have to install like 3 or 4 plugins to get, for example, your YouTube videos looking at a very good way, and the same thing for a few other features. So you gotta, a lot of the things are available in the newer versions of WordPress. So you can basically say, that's okay, I can handle that. I mean, the newer version of WordPress does not need as many plugins for multimedia as we had before, right? So keep that in mind. All right, so I have a little rule that I teach all my students, all right? What's the most important thing to keep in mind? So I have basically create my little rules of 3, all right? Check always, just like in Amazon, check the rating. If a lot of people say, this is a terrible plugin, and they give them 1 star, if I could give that plugin a 0, I will give it to it. And so obviously, I mean, why would you install something so terrible, okay, unless you're a masochist, right? So don't install I mean, if you want to play around, use your own local computer or a test server, etc., etc. But don't do this on a production server, please. Right? So again, my first rule of thumb: make sure that it has at least 4 or 5 stars as far as the rating. That the plugin has more than 1,000 installs. The second rule here is it has to be at least version 101. That's the preferred. Of course, if you only have a 1.0. It took like 2 years to become version 1 something as they are now. So, and still, there are many plugins that the author says, hey, this is still not ready for production. They call it 0.8 or 9, kind of beta. So be careful. Again, do not install that. Or again, if you really, really need the functionality, make sure you fully test that plugin on a test environment before you copy to production. The other thing is the freshness. How, if you look at the date, again, the WordPress plugins gives you the heads up that, hey, this hasn't been updated in a year, or you can see, hey, this has been updated about 10 days ago or 2 months ago. So you see the developer is still alive and they're contributing to the WordPress community and they're doing the job. As far as, again, most of the stuff is volunteer. Some of them are paid plugins, but so again, make sure you install something that is kind of fresh, right? So it's nothing that is so stale that is ancient. All right, so, and this is just, again, for the technical people in the crowd, you've seen that 100 times, but some of people that don't recall, I mean, all the plugins and themes get stored under WP content, all right? So we'll get to this directly in just a second, all right? So just a little reminder where the plugins get stored. Because, again, I told you about that 503 error. I had to SFTP to my server and rename the plugins to something else to figure out, oh, yeah, it was one of the plugins. So then I went and starting mini-pack, what was the last update until, oh, yeah, that was the WPML. Renamed that one and single which one was causing the 503 error on the server. All right, so now, since I mentioned about the directory, and this is sometimes it's Apache related or IIS. Now, normally the top level of your web server, there is an HT access, hypertext access file, which is just a simple file that normally uses to restrict who can access. It can also do redirects. Okay, it can also indicate which version of PHP. It can do a lot of, this file. For Apache, it tells a little bit of, quite a few things of what it can be done. It can also block people, okay, bad IP addresses or, certain things. It can also protect the content, okay. A lot of people forget to protect the content, like if you have books or lessons or anything like that. By the way, my website, since it's for my students, is open to the public, so you're welcome to peruse the learn.wp.us. Right. But there is a plugin called Protect Uploads that you install it, you set it, and simple as that. So if anybody goes to your WP-uploads, WP content uploads, they won't see anything. It will be a blank page. Normally, what you see in most default WordPress installation, you can see the folders. Everything updated. Uploaded 2018 /01, and so you can see all the pictures, all the media that people upload. People can come in and steal your copyrighted material. So just giving the heads up. So again, this is for protecting your content. Now, the other thing related to that, okay, and deals, and this is where we get to the user layer, the last layer, since we're talking about Apache. Remember, we went security inside, outside, to the outside. So now with accounts, all right, so these are more a collection of tips. Number one, never ever use the admin, don't create an account called admin. And some of you will say, but Adrian, why not? I mean, admin is a great, yeah, thank you, please test it for the WPC client command line mode directive. All right, and Daniel follows on that. So the reason, you can create an account admin. I don't recommend it. Guess why? Because that's the #1 account most hackers, or not professional hackers. I'm talking about the script kiddies, people that are trying to, looking for low-hanging fruit. They're going to look at your site, and the first account they're going to try is admin, because they assume 99% of the accounts out, the websites out there have the admin account. So don't have an account called admin. Use your first name, last name, or some, happen to have a unique last name, so that helps. But you can say J Smith 77 or whatever, just something unique. But don't use admin. Also, if you have more than one admin at your group, don't share the admin account. I mean, it's not that expensive, folks. I mean, it's only a few more cents of microspace there. Just create enough accounts to do the job, right? So if you have 3 administrators, give everybody an administrator account. Don't be cheap, right? The reason for that is you want accountability. If something happens, hey, who was the last person who installed that plugin? Everybody starts pointing fingers at each other, right? So if you have a unique password, unique ID that basically identifies who is doing what, then you can hold somebody accountable. Right. Another thing that you see that in a lot of the security tips out there, it says don't use the default login URL. Well, what if you want the users to log in? Well, you can add a little plugin on the sidebar. You can give them a menu option that will take them to a login page. Could be a login form for that matter. All right. The other advantage of using a custom login page is that you can put in your school logo. So that's good. Right, that keeps you moving. Instead of having the standard WPE from WordPress logo. That's one of my recommendations. I mean, it's not the only one, but there's a great plugin that I use in a few of my sites called Theme My Login that has a sidebar widget. It lets you brand. There's a handful like that, by the way. It's not the only one, but it's very good, efficient, and it's a free plugin. The other thing I will do also for administrators, there was a great plugin called Clef. You go to getclef.com, sign up, and you will impress all the people when you pull up your smartphone and point at your website, and you'll see those vertical bars going like a giant barcode. It was so cool. Unfortunately, the company didn't make enough money, so they shut it down. But there are other companies that provide, including Google, 2-factor authentication. You can get a quick response code or a text message. So if you're the administrator, you should really if you only have a little site, it's not a big deal, but you should need to keep that in mind. That if it's only a test site, don't go crazy. But if it's a production site that has hundreds of users or thousands of users, make sure you enable 2-factor authentication. 2-factor meaning something you know and something you have. So something you have to be your smartphone or a Rolodex or some secret token device, right? That's what we mean by that. So now I'd like to wrap up. We're gonna go over questions in a few minutes, but I just want to close with a couple of more slides that, again, some of the things that you need to keep in mind other accounts. We talk about just logging in, but there are other accounts like your hosting or your server. Okay, that's the operating system account, user admin password. You can remote log into the server via secure shell. You may have FTP or secure FTP, which is better. That also has its own account and passwords. The database itself, which is in the wp-config PHP file on the root of your WordPress configuration website, and sometimes even email accounts and passwords. So there are other accounts that you need to keep in mind, right? And I just want to close up this presentation by letting you know. I mean, we covered a few of the basics, but you can also install some plugins that will do a lot of the stuff automatically. They will basically set up a firewall to block out bad people, detect and block malicious activity like that Bitcoin server. It will say, hey, this plugin doesn't look like is the official version. What's going on, right? So we'll basically let you know that there is something wrong in your site. There is some either malicious or modified files. They will also schedule a malware scanning session. You can also check your password security. You can also, there are some plugins that will force your users to change their password every 30, 60, or 90 days, depending on your security policy. So some of the plugins that do some of that stuff, my favorite is called WordFence, and you can get started for free. And the same thing with iThemes, by the way, even though it used to be paid, but again, to compete with WordFence has over 2 million downloads. That's how good it is. And then for like $2 to $5 a month, all right, you can also get the latest and greatest and additional features that the free one doesn't have. There's also a bulletproof security that has like 90,000 downloads, whoopie-doo. iThemes is in the 200,000. But like I said, WordFence, you can see, even on the free one, you can see live traffic. You can see who's logging in. You see all these Russian index sites trying to, Yandex, trying to analyze your site, right? Now, every time I call GoDaddy, they're trying to sell me this security plan. They don't know I'm a security person, right? But of course, one of the things, instead of doing the security at your WordPress site, they can basically monitor their network. They can block before it gets that far. So another option is if you sign up with a content delivery network like MaxCDN, Amazon Cloud Systems, so they can really basically protect your site by, before the traffic gets to your site, they can block malicious people right there and then. So that's an extra layer right at the hosting provider. And I'd like to close before I go to the questions and answers section. There is a couple other things. Again, for the technical crowd, the first link will be your best. The OWASP. OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Program. It's a website dedicated just to security. So I'd like to thank all of you for having participated and joined us for this WordPress security presentation. Thank you, everyone. Take care.